You probably picture ancient sex as grim and mechanical. Two bodies in the dark, driven by hunger and survival, over as fast as possible before a predator noticed. Functional, joyless, practically a chore. Here is the problem with that picture. The human body contains a structure with no reproductive function whatsoever, present since our species began, whose only documented purpose is pleasure. So, if evolution built something purely for pleasure this early, the answer to how much fun ancient humans were having is not what you think. The uncomfortable truth about most animals is this. For the vast majority of species on Earth, sex is not really about fun. It is about one thing: timing. Female animals signal very clearly when they are fertile, through scent, through color, through behavior, and males respond to that signal. The whole system is efficient and not particularly romantic. There is a window. Everyone knows when the window is, and that is when mating happens. Outside that window, not much is going on. Humans are weird. Human females, unlike almost every other mammal, do not advertise ovulation. There is no visible signal, no obvious scent change, no color shift. Even the woman herself often cannot tell exactly when she is ovulating without tracking it carefully. This is called concealed ovulation, and it is genuinely unusual in the animal kingdom. And here is the thing, this is not an accident, this is an adaptation. Evolution does not keep things that do not work. So why would concealed ovulation evolve? Think about what it changes. If no one knows when the fertile window is, then sex cannot be limited to that window. Partners who want to maximize their chances of reproduction have to stay together, stay engaged, keep the relationship going. Concealed ovulation effectively turns sex from a seasonal event into something that could happen year-round. And with that shift came something entirely new. The possibility that sex could serve social purposes beyond reproduction, that it could build bonds, reduce conflict, express affection, keep partnerships stable. Sit with that for a second. The very feature of human biology that makes sex possible for fun is not a malfunction or a luxury. It may be one of the things that helped hold early human groups together. Now, here is where it gets even more interesting. We are not the only primates who figured this out. Bonobos, one of our two closest living relatives sharing about 98.7% of our DNA, have built an entire social structure around this principle. And when I say entire social structure, I mean it. Greeting behavior, conflict resolution, food sharing, alliance building, stress reduction after a frightening event. Basically, every situation that would cause a chimpanzee to start a fight causes a bonobo to do something entirely different. If something tense happens in a bonobo group, physical contact is often how the group repairs itself and moves on. Researchers who study bonobos describe it as a kind of social language, which means bonobos figured out something that humans spend a lot of time and therapy money rediscovering, that closeness resolves tension faster than conflict does. This matters for our question because bonobos and humans share a common ancestor. The social behaviors we see in bonobos did not appear out of nowhere. They evolved, which means the capacity to use physical intimacy for social bonding rather than purely for reproduction has deep roots in our evolutionary history. Ancient humans did not invent this. They inherited it and then built on it. The human brain's reward system, the dopamine pathways that register something as worth doing again, is activated by sex in a way that is unusually strong and unusually decoupled from reproductive outcome. In most animals, the reward is tied fairly tightly to reproductive success. In humans, the reward fires regardless of outcome. This means the neurological experience of pleasure was almost certainly present in early humans in a robust way. The brain was already set up to register this as a positive experience worth repeating, independent of whether it led to reproduction. This reward architecture, combined with concealed ovulation and year-round sexual activity, created something unusual, a species for whom physical intimacy became a primary mode of social bonding. Not just a reproductive behavior with occasional social effects, a social behavior in its own right. What did that look like on the ground? This is where we have to be honest about the limits of what archaeology can tell us. We cannot dig up ancient feelings. We cannot find a fossil record of desire or affection, but we can find proxy evidence. things that tell us something about how ancient humans were living and relating to each other. Here is one that stops people when they hear it. Ochre, a red pigment made from iron-rich clay, shows up in the archaeological record going back at least 100,000 years, and possibly much longer. For a long time, researchers assumed it was used for practical purposes: sunscreen, insect repellent, preservation of animal hides, and it was probably used for those things. But ochre also shows up in burial sites, on personal ornaments, in contexts that look very much like decoration and self-expression. People were coloring themselves. They were adorning their bodies. That is not behavior you do for survival. That is behavior you do because other people are looking at you, and you want to look a certain way. Body decoration implies an audience. An audience implies relationships. Relationships imply all the complexity that comes with them: attraction, status, competition, affiliation, care. By the time humans were decorating themselves with ochre, they were almost certainly navigating a rich social world that included something that looked a lot like courtship. There is one more piece of evidence worth mentioning here, and it is the kind of thing that stops people mid-sentence when they hear it. Lice. Specifically, the two distinct species of lice that live on humans: head lice and pubic lice. These two species diverged from a common ancestor somewhere around 3 million years ago, which corresponds roughly to when our hominin ancestors began losing body hair. Head lice stayed on head hair. Pubic lice moved to the only remaining patch of comparable hair on the body. The fact that pubic lice exist at all, and that they have been with us for millions of years, tells us something specific. Early hominins were in close enough physical contact, regularly enough, that a parasite specialized for exactly that kind of contact could evolve and persist across millions of years. That is not evidence of occasional contact. That is evidence of sustained, repeated, close physical proximity between individuals, exactly what you would expect if physical intimacy was a regular feature of social life rather than a rare reproductive event. Ancient humans also almost certainly experienced something we would recognize as pair bonding. The archaeological evidence for this is indirect but consistent. Early human campsites show evidence of long-term occupation by groups that were structured differently from chimpanzee groups, with more stable male-female associations, with evidence of food sharing that went beyond simple caloric exchange, with patterns that suggest ongoing relationships rather than short-term encounters. Pair bonding is not the same as modern monogamy, and early humans were almost certainly not monogamous in the strict modern sense. But sustained relationships between specific individuals, with mutual investment and ongoing attachment, that appears to have been part of the picture very early. And attachment, once it exists, changes everything. Because attachment means you actually care what happens to this specific person, not just in terms of reproduction, in terms of them, their presence, their well-being, their continued existence in your life. The neurochemistry of this is real, and it is old. Oxytocin, sometimes called the bonding hormone, is released during physical intimacy, during birth, during nursing, during sustained social contact. It promotes trust, reduces anxiety, strengthens social bonds. This system is not a modern invention. It is ancient. It is shared across mammals. It was almost certainly active in early human brains, long before anyone had words to describe what it did. One more thing before the answer, because it reframes everything. Most people assume that ancient humans were mostly focused on survival, finding food, avoiding predators, staying alive long enough to reproduce. And that is true. But survival in a social species does not just mean physical survival. It means maintaining your position in a group. It means keeping alliances strong. It means not getting excluded, not getting abandoned, not losing the social support that was essential for anyone who was sick, injured, pregnant, or caring for young children. In that context, the behaviors that built and maintained close bonds with specific individuals were not luxuries. They were survival tools. And if physical intimacy was one of those tools, if it reduced conflict, strengthened alliances, communicated care, created obligations of mutual support, then engaging in it for social reasons rather than purely reproductive ones was not indulgent. It was adaptive. This is what researchers mean when they say the distinction between pleasure and function is complicated for humans. The pleasure was real. The social function was real. Both were happening at the same time. And over hundreds of thousands of years of social living, those two things became deeply intertwined in a way that is genuinely hard to separate. So, what is the honest answer to the question? Did ancient humans have sex for fun? Probably yes, in the sense that the experience of physical intimacy was pleasurable, that it occurred outside of strictly reproductive contexts, and that it served social and emotional functions beyond just making babies. But the more interesting answer is that the distinction between fun and function may not have been as clear for them as we assume. The pleasure was real, the bonding effects were real, the social benefits were real. All of those things were happening at the same time, and evolution kept all of them because they all worked. What makes humans unusual is not that we separated sex from reproduction. Plenty of species do things that look like play and social bonding through physical contact. What makes us unusual is the degree to which we built elaborate cultural structures around it. Courtship rituals, pair bonds, long-term partnerships with mutual investment in offspring, the social complexity of jealousy and fidelity, and all the negotiations that come with them. We took something that started as a biological mechanism and turned it into one of the central organizing features of human social life. That is a very long way from efficiency, and it probably started the moment our ancestors stopped advertising exactly when reproduction was possible and started leaving the question open.